Restaurant manager kicks out black waitress. Then bikers appear and did the unimaginable. Hey there. Welcome to today's story, where a single decision can change the course of a person's life forever. Have you ever felt like you were stuck in a situation with no way out? Like the world was against you and everything you did just seemed to go unnoticed or unappreciated? Well, that's exactly what happened to Jasmine, a young woman who worked as a waitress at a small family-owned diner. She was hardworking, friendly, and had dreams of building a better life for herself. But one night, an unfair decision at work would send her life spiraling in a direction she never expected. What happens next is a story of strength, betrayal, and an unexpected twist of fate. Jasmine's world, once full of hard work and routine, will collide with a force so powerful it will shake her to her core. Just when she thought all hope was lost, something unimaginable happens. A group of bikers, known for their tough reputation and wild ways, strolls into the diner, and the events that follow will leave you speechless. This isn't just a story about a waitress losing her job. No, this is a story about how kindness, justice, and the power of standing up for what's right can sometimes come from the most unexpected places. And trust me, you won't believe what happens next. Just when everything seems to be at its lowest, fate has a funny way of surprising us. If you've ever faced an obstacle that felt impossible to overcome, or if you've ever wondered what it's like to be given a second chance when you least expect it, then this story is for you. Jasmine's journey isn't just about overcoming unfairness. It's about finding the courage to rise above it, and having people show up when she needed them the most. So buckle up and get ready for a wild ride filled with unexpected twists and turns that will keep you on the edge of your seat. You won't see the ending coming, and by the time it's over, you'll be thinking about what it truly means to stand up for yourself and others. And when you're done, don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment below to share your thoughts. Let us know where you're watching from and how you would have acted in Jasmine's shoes. Would you have stayed silent, or would you have fought back? Now let's dive into this incredible story, where a manager's unfair decision, a group of bikers, and a waitress's fight for justice all come together in a way no one could have predicted. It was a warm Friday evening at Sunny's Diner, the small, family-owned restaurant that everyone in town loved. The familiar sounds of clinking silverware, sizzling grills, and friendly chatter filled the air. The smell of hot, fresh burgers and crispy fries was enough to make anyone's mouth water. But amidst the bustling energy, there was a growing tension that no one could feel except for Jasmine. Jasmine had been working at the diner for almost a year. She loved her job. She enjoyed meeting new people, serving them their favorite meals, and sharing a smile with the regulars. Most of all, she loved the feeling of being part of a community. She had always been friendly, hardworking, and always tried to give her best. But the one person who seemed to never appreciate her efforts was the manager, Mr. Hutton. Mr. Hutton was a tall, stern man with an icy gaze. He didn't smile often, and when he did, it felt more like a grimace than a friendly gesture. He was known for being quick-tempered, especially when it came to little mistakes. Jasmine, like many others, had noticed how he was extra harsh with her. Sometimes, he would criticize her for the smallest things, like a drink being a few degrees too cold or an order arriving 2 minutes late. Jasmine couldn't understand why he was so hard on her. It was as if he was just waiting for her to make a mistake, so he could pounce. That evening, the diner was packed, and Jasmine was working her usual shift, bouncing between tables, filling drink orders, and making sure customers were happy. It had been a long day, and her feet ached from all the running around, but she kept going, determined to finish strong. But as the night wore on, Mr. Hutton called her into the back office. His face was twisted with frustration, and she could feel her heart race with a sense of dread. "Jasmine, we need to talk," Mr. Hutton said, his voice low and harsh. He pointed to a chair, and Jasmine sat down, already sensing that something wasn't right. "What's wrong, Mr. Hutton?" she asked, trying to keep her voice calm. "You've been messing up orders all night," he snapped. "And you keep chatting with customers instead of doing your job. You think this is a social club. No, this is a business, and I expect better." Jasmine was taken aback. She had worked as hard as she could all night, and she had always tried to be polite to customers. She knew she wasn't perfect, but she didn't think she deserved to be treated like this. "I'm really sorry, Mr. Hutton," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "I've been doing my best, and I'll try harder." But Mr. Hutton wasn't listening. His face grew even redder, his fists clenched on the desk. "I'm tired of hearing excuses," he said, practically spitting the words. "You're fired. Pack your things and leave. Now." Jasmine froze. Her mind couldn't process what was happening. Fired. How could he do this to her? She had worked so hard to get this job. She had always shown up on time, done her best, and tried to be kind to everyone. She was caught in a whirlwind of emotions, shock, confusion, and sadness. She had no idea how to respond. But Mr. Hutton, please," she stammered. "I need this job. I don't have anywhere else to go. Please. But before she could finish, Mr. Hutton cut her off, his voice cold and final. "I don't want to hear it. Just go. Now." Jasmine felt a lump in her throat as she stood up from the chair. Tears threatened to spill from her eyes, but she quickly wiped them away. She couldn't believe it was happening. One minute she was serving food with a smile, and the next minute she was being kicked out of the only place she had ever worked. The weight of the situation crashed over her like a ton of bricks. She walked out of the office in a daze, feeling small and humiliated. The other employees glanced at her, but no one said anything. It was as if they knew this was coming but were too afraid to do anything about it. Jasmine grabbed her jacket and left through the back door, stepping out into the cool night air. As she walked down the quiet street, her mind was spinning. She had worked so hard, and yet it didn't matter. She felt like the world had turned its back on her. The tears she had been holding back finally spilled down her cheeks. The streetlights flickered above her as she walked aimlessly, unsure of where to go next. It was a moment of pure hopelessness, but little did Jasmine know, this was only the beginning. Something incredible was about to happen, something that would change her life forever. But for now, she was lost, broken, and unsure of what the future would hold. Jasmine walked aimlessly down the empty street, her footsteps echoing in the cool night air. Her heart was heavy with confusion and hurt. She couldn't believe how quickly everything had fallen apart. The tears she had tried to hold back earlier were now freely flowing, and she wiped them away angrily, refusing to let anyone see her weakness. Her mind kept racing over what had happened at Sonny's diner. Mr. Hutton's harsh words, the shock of being fired, and the feeling of being abandoned. It all seemed so unfair. She didn't know where to go. Her small apartment wasn't far from the diner, but she couldn't bear the thought of going back there. It felt like a betrayal of all the hard work she had put in, and she had no idea what she would tell her family. They had always been proud of her for getting the job, and now she felt like a failure. As she kept walking, trying to push away the thoughts that were making her feel so small, a loud rumble interrupted the silence of the night. The noise grew louder and louder until it felt like the ground was shaking beneath her feet. Jasmine looked up, confused, and squinted as headlights appeared around the corner. Suddenly, a group of motorcycles roared into view. The sound of their engines was deafening as a line of bikes sped toward her, their bright headlights cutting through the night like beacons. Jasmine's heart skipped a beat. She had heard of the Thunder Riders before. They were a tough, well-known motorcycle gang that sometimes passed through town. Everyone in the neighborhood had heard rumors about them, about how they could be loud, rowdy, and a bit dangerous. Some people thought they were troublemakers, while others respected them for their fearlessness. But tonight, as the bikers came closer, Jasmine wasn't sure what to think. They weren't just passing through. This time, they were stopping. The group of bikers pulled up in front of the diner, their engines rumbling to a stop as they parked their bikes in a row. There were at least 5 of them, and they all wore black leather jackets with the Thunder Riders emblem proudly displayed on the back. Tattoos and patches covered their arms, and their faces were hidden behind dark sunglasses, even though it was nighttime. Jasmine stood frozen on the sidewalk, unsure of what to do. She had never been this close to them before, and she certainly never imagined her night would take this turn. As the bikers dismounted, they moved with confidence, their boots hitting the pavement with a heavy thud. They weren't the kind of people you could easily ignore. A cold gust of wind blew through the street, and Jasmine felt a shiver run down her spine. She watched as the bikers walked toward the diner's entrance. She could hear the soft murmur of their voices, but she couldn't make out what they were saying. For a moment, it felt like the entire town had gone still. Jasmine couldn't help but feel a little nervous. She had heard all the stories about the Thunder Riders, but they didn't seem to be causing trouble tonight. They were just there, like a sudden storm, unpredictable and strange. She couldn't understand why they had stopped, but she was curious. Something about the way they carried themselves felt different from the usual trouble they caused. It was like they had a purpose, and that purpose might involve more than just hanging out at a diner. As she watched from a distance, feeling like an outsider in her own town, Jasmine couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. She wasn't sure if it was a good or bad change, but it was something. There was a strange pull, like the world was shifting beneath her feet, and she was caught in the middle of it. The bikers entered the diner one by one, their leather jackets brushing against the doorframe as they stepped inside. The door closed behind them with a soft thud, and for a moment, the street was eerily quiet again. Jasmine stayed where she was, too unsure of what to do next. She wasn't sure if she should stay and watch, or if she should leave and go somewhere else, far from the unexpected encounter unfolding before her. But she didn't leave. She stayed, her feet rooted to the ground as if drawn by some invisible force. She didn't know it yet, but this moment, the moment when the bikers walked into the diner, would be the moment that changed everything for her. It would be the turning point that would show her that even in the darkest of times, there can be light and kindness from the most unexpected sources. For now, though, Jasmine was still caught in her own world of hurt and confusion, watching from the outside as the bikers took their seats inside the diner, unaware of the profound impact they were about to have on her life. The sounds inside Sunny's diner changed the moment the bikers entered. The usual hum of conversation, the clinking of silverware, and the sizzle from the kitchen all seemed to fade away, replaced by an uncomfortable silence. It was as if everyone in the diner instinctively held their breath. The air had shifted. The bikers, with their long leather jackets, tattoos, and imposing presence, were not the usual type of customers the diner had seen. They didn't fit in with the typical crowd of families and local regulars. Some of the patrons glanced nervously at each other, unsure of how to react. Jasmine stood outside on the sidewalk, her heart pounding in her chest. She hadn't planned on watching this. She had no reason to stay. She was supposed to be heading home, processing the shock of losing her job. But something inside her kept her feet glued to the pavement. She felt drawn to the situation unfolding in front of her, as if she were part of something bigger than herself. Inside, the bikers settled into a large booth at the far end of the diner. Their leader, a tall, powerful woman with fiery red hair and piercing blue eyes, led the way. She commanded attention with every step. Her name was Storm, and she had earned her nickname long ago. She was known for being tough, but also for having an undeniable sense of justice. Despite her rough exterior, Storm was fiercely loyal to her people and had a reputation for standing up for the underdog. Tonight, she would do the same. Jasmine could barely make out the conversation from outside, but she could see the bikers laughing and chatting with the waitress who was serving them. They didn't seem intimidating. If anything, they seemed like regular customers. But then, as they began to finish their meals, Storm suddenly stood up. The other bikers followed her lead, their eyes still fixed on the manager, Mr. Hutton, who was behind the counter, nervously wiping his hands on a towel. Jasmine's heart began to race as she watched through the window. She could tell that something was about to happen. The bikers weren't here to simply eat and leave. They had a purpose, and the focus of that purpose seemed to be Mr. Hutton, the man who had unjustly fired her. Storm's voice rang out clear and calm as she approached the counter. "You," she said, locking eyes with Mr. Hutton. Her tone was steady, but there was an edge to it, something that made the whole diner sit up straighter. "You owe this young lady an apology." Mr. Hutton looked up, his face turning pale as if he had just seen a ghost. He had no idea what was happening. His fingers trembled as he put down the dish towel, his eyes darting nervously from the bikers to the few customers still sitting at their tables. The weight of the room seemed to press down on him. He swallowed hard, trying to maintain his composure, but the confidence he usually exuded was gone. "What are you talking about?" Mr. Hutton asked, his voice shaky, almost desperate. Storm didn't flinch. "You fired her," she said firmly, pointing towards Jasmine, who was still standing outside, her eyes wide with surprise. "You fired her for no reason, without a second thought, after she worked her tail off for you. That's wrong." Jasmine's stomach twisted in knots. She could hear every word Storm said from outside, and it made her heart flutter with a mixture of hope and disbelief. Her chest tightened, her breath coming in short gasps. She wanted to run inside, to somehow be a part of the conversation, but she stayed frozen, watching from the sidelines. The tension in the diner grew thick. The other bikers stood up now, their imposing figures surrounding Mr. Hutton. They didn't say anything at first, but their presence spoke volumes. Their arms were crossed, and their eyes locked onto the manager with a sense of unshakable determination. The other customers looked on, some nervous, some intrigued, but no one dared to speak. Jasmine could feel every second dragging on, but she couldn't tear her eyes away. This was more than just a confrontation between a manager and a waitress. It was about something much bigger: justice, fairness, and standing up to cruelty when no one else would. Mr. Hutton's face turned a deep shade of red as he shifted uncomfortably behind the counter. He was clearly caught off guard by the bikers' support for Jasmine. Sweat began to form on his brow. I don't know what you expect me to do," he stammered. "She's a problem. I've told her time and again to do her job properly, but she just..." Before he could finish, Storm cut him off, her voice low but powerful. "You don't get to treat people like that. You don't get to take someone's dignity and think you can get away with it." Her eyes flashed with fire, and for a moment, it felt like the entire diner was holding its breath. "You're going to apologize, and you're going to make it right." The air was heavy with silence. Mr. Hutton swallowed hard, his eyes darting around the room, looking for a way out of this uncomfortable situation. He seemed defeated, but he still didn't speak. The bikers didn't move. They waited, unblinking, their silence more powerful than any words could have been. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Mr. Hutton mumbled a quiet, reluctant apology. I'm sorry. I didn't mean it," he muttered, his voice barely audible. But Storm wasn't finished. She wasn't going to let this moment slide without giving Jasmine what she truly deserved. "Good," she said, her voice firm and steady. "But that's not enough. You're going to make things right. You're going to help her, not hurt her." With that, Storm turned to Jasmine, who was still standing outside, unable to believe what was happening. She gestured for Jasmine to come inside, her voice softening slightly. "Come on in, girl. We've got you." Jasmine's heart skipped a beat. The whole diner was watching, and Mr. Hutton was still standing there, looking completely defeated. It was the most unexpected turn of events she could have imagined. The bikers weren't just making a scene, they were making a difference. They were standing up for her, and they were forcing Mr. Hutton to realize what he had done. The truth had been laid bare, and there was no turning back. Jasmine wasn't alone anymore. And this was just the beginning. The silence in the diner was deafening after Storm's powerful words. Jasmine's heart raced as she watched, still standing outside the window, trying to absorb everything that had just unfolded. Mr. Hutton had apologized, but it felt so hollow, so forced. The bikers didn't seem to care about his apology. They weren't there for that. They were there for something more. Storm took a step back, and without taking her eyes off Mr. Hutton, pulled a thick envelope from her leather jacket. It was almost like she had been prepared for this moment, as if she knew exactly what needed to happen next. With one smooth motion, she handed it to Jasmine, who had slowly walked toward the door at Storm's invitation. "Here," Storm said, her voice calm but full of strength. "This is for you. You deserve better than what that man gave you." Jasmine froze. She hadn't expected anything like this. She had thought the bikers were just standing up for her, showing Mr. Hutton that what he did wasn't right. But this was something completely different. A thick envelope, handed to her in front of everyone, filled with a sense of purpose. Jasmine's hands shook as she reached for it, still not fully understanding what was happening. Her breath was short, her heart thudding so loudly in her chest that she thought everyone in the diner could hear it. "What's this?" Jasmine asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Storm gave her a reassuring smile, though it was hard and firm, like she was used to dealing with tough situations. "Open it." Jasmine ripped open the envelope, her fingers trembling as she pulled out a check. It was a large check, more than enough to cover her rent, her bills, and give her time to get back on her feet. Jasmine's mouth went dry. She couldn't believe what she was holding. She looked up at Storm, her eyes wide with shock. No, I can't take this," Jasmine stammered, her voice barely coming out. "This is too much." "I didn't." Storm interrupted, her voice gentle but unwavering. "Yes, you can. You deserve this and more. You've worked hard. You've been wronged. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. I've been where you are, and I'm not about to let you walk out of here with nothing." Jasmine's head was spinning. She wanted to refuse, wanted to hand the check back, but a deep part of her knew she couldn't. She couldn't ignore the kindness and understanding that was being offered to her. She had never expected something like this, especially not from a group of bikers, people society sometimes judged as nothing more than troublemakers. But here they were, giving her a lifeline when she had none. The other bikers were standing quietly around the diner now, watching. Their eyes weren't cold or distant. Instead, there was a warmth in them, a silent support that spoke volumes. They weren't here to cause trouble. They were here to stand by Jasmine, to make sure she wasn't left alone in her time of need. The diner, with all its regulars, seemed to fade away as Jasmine stood there, surrounded by this unexpected group of people who had given her so much more than she could ever have imagined. But the story wasn't over yet. Jasmine looked at Mr. Hutton, who was still behind the counter, his face drained of color. He had been completely taken aback by the biker's intervention, his hands trembling as he tried to recover from the confrontation. Jasmine could see that he was regretting every harsh word he'd said to her, but the damage had already been done. His apology wasn't enough, and everyone in the diner could see that. Storm didn't take her eyes off Mr. Hutton, her gaze steady and filled with a kind of quiet power. "This isn't just about what you did to her," Storm said, her voice carrying through the diner. "This is about making sure you never do it again. You don't get to treat people like that. Not on our watch." The other bikers nodded in agreement, their presence like a wall of support surrounding Storm. Mr. Hutton remained silent, his shoulders slumped in defeat. He had no words left. The other customers in the diner, who had been quietly observing the scene, began to murmur among themselves. The energy had shifted. The tension had dissolved, replaced by a sense of collective relief. There was no longer any uncertainty. The wrongs had been called out, and the power had shifted. Storm turned back to Jasmine, her voice softening a little. "I know it's hard to accept this right now, but you've been through enough. Don't let this moment define you. What matters is what you do from here." Jasmine felt a tear slip down her cheek, But it wasn't a tear of sadness. It was a tear of gratitude. A tear for the unexpected kindness that had appeared when she needed it the most. For the first time that night, she didn't feel broken. She didn't feel small. She felt empowered, as if she had been given a second chance, not just by the bikers, but by life itself. She held the check tightly in her hands, taking a deep breath. "Thank you," she whispered, barely able to find the words. "Thank you so much." Storm gave her a nod, her lips curling into a faint, knowing smile. "You're welcome, girl. Just remember, you're stronger than you think." With that, Storm and the other bikers stood up. The air felt different now, lighter, freer. They turned and made their way toward the door, their boots echoing through the diner. As they left, they didn't cause chaos or create a scene. Instead, they left behind a quiet, powerful message. A reminder that when things go wrong, there is always a chance to make them right. And that sometimes, kindness and justice come from the most unexpected places. Jasmine stood there, still holding the check in her hands, her heart full of emotion. She knew this wasn't just the end of a story. It was the beginning of something new. A new chapter for her, one where she would no longer be afraid of standing up for herself, one where she would believe in the kindness of others. She wasn't going to let this moment pass without using it as fuel to keep going. She was going to rise above the hurt, above the disappointment. She was going to start again. As the last of the bikers disappeared into the night, their engines roaring down the street, the air in the diner slowly began to shift back to its normal rhythm. But Jasmine knew nothing would ever feel the same again. She still stood there, holding the check in her trembling hands, her heart racing with a mixture of emotions, gratitude, disbelief, and an overwhelming sense of power she hadn't felt in a long time. The few customers who had remained were whispering amongst themselves, some still in shock over what they had witnessed. Jasmine could feel their eyes on her, but for the first time that night, it didn't make her uncomfortable. She was no longer the woman who had just been fired and humiliated by her boss. She wasn't the one who had been mistreated. Tonight, she was someone different, stronger, more determined, and empowered. Mr. Hutton, however, was still standing behind the counter, looking like a man who had just been caught in a lie he couldn't escape from. He was fumbling with the register, unable to make eye contact with anyone in the room. His world had turned upside down in a matter of moments. Jasmine had stood up for herself without saying a word, and Storm had delivered a message Mr. Hutton would never forget. You can't just treat people any way you want. No one is too small to be treated with respect. Jasmine turned to face him. Her voice, though soft, carried the weight of everything that had happened. "You may have fired me," she said, her words measured. "But tonight, I've learned more about my worth than I ever did working here." Mr. Hutton glanced up at her, his eyes filled with regret and shame. He opened his mouth, perhaps to say something, but then hesitated. What could he say? How could he fix what had been broken? The damage was done, but the lesson, one that was taught not by words but by action, had already been imparted. Jasmine had been given the gift of a second chance, not by Mr. Hutton, but by people who believed in fairness and justice. People who had shown her that standing up for herself didn't make her weak, it made her strong. With a final glance toward the door where the bikers had just left, Jasmine walked out of the diner, her head held high. She wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she felt ready to face it. She would find another job, work hard, and prove to herself that she didn't need anyone's validation to know her worth. The biker's gift wasn't just financial. It was a reminder that no matter where you come from or how tough life gets, there are always unexpected heroes who can change the course of your life. They had given her hope. And more importantly, they had given her the strength to rise above the unfairness that had tried to hold her down. As Jasmine walked into the night, the weight of her past mistakes and the hurt of her firing began to slip away. She wasn't just the woman who was fired. She was someone who had been given a fresh start, a chance to rise again, a chance to prove that no matter the obstacles, no one could take away her dignity or her future. Did you enjoy this emotional and suspenseful story? If so, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and comment below. We'd love to hear from you. Tell us where you're watching from, and share your thoughts on what happened in the story. Would you have acted differently if you were in Mr. Hutton's shoes? How would you have handled such a situation? We want to know. Stories like this remind us that we all have the power to make a difference, to stand up for what's right, and to offer kindness when we see someone in need. Thanks for watching. And remember, sometimes the most unexpected people can change your life forever.